You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to BuckeyeGrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Mom! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
Good Friday, everybody. Welcome back to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast. I am your host, Kyle Lamb. We are brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com. I hope if you have not done so already, you do go to Buckeye Grove and check it out. Of course, publisher Kevin Noon, Nevada Buck, Kirk Barton, former Ohio State captain and offensive lineman, Mark Gibler, who you will hear from later on in the show as we have a little bit of recruiting chatter to bring at you. We'll talk about a couple of commitments Ohio State picked up in the past week. And, of course, the ongoing, never-ending Zach Harrison saga. Will he or won't he leave the state of Ohio and go play football in the state up north? We will get into that and some 2020 recruiting chatter with Mark as well. So, yeah, I hope you check out Buckeye Grove if you've not done so. Ross Fulton, you hear him every Monday here on the show. His insight, his analysis of the X's and O's of the games, I think, is worth the price of admission alone. Of course, we have interns Andy and Cameron that do a great job assisting Kevin with the day-to-day coverage of Ohio State football. And soon to Ohio State basketball, which we will also get into here on the show. I would like to, here in a few minutes, give my thoughts on Ohio State's big 64-56 win over Cincinnati on Wednesday down in the reopening of Fifth Third Arena. Great win for the Buckeyes. I will get into that in a second. But, of course, we will also be talking Ohio State football. The Buckeyes traveling up north to East Lansing in what should be a breezy, chilly, windy, cold, November environment up there in East Lansing against the Spartans. Noon kickoff on Fox. And, this game, I'm not going to have a conventional opponent preview here. I was not able to coordinate with a publisher or editor up there for the Michigan State site. I was not able to get somebody on to talk about Michigan State, but I will say this. Just looking at Michigan State from afar, seeing some of their games here the past several weeks, bits and pieces of their games. I did watch most of their game against Michigan. I watched a good majority of their game against Penn State the week before that. I did not really see much of Purdue and Maryland last 2 weeks. But I will say this, just looking at the stats, looking at what they've done, I know they're not going to scare people offensively, nor should they. They have not really been a juggernaut. The run game just has not clicked for them. Brian Lewerke has been a turnover machine at times. They've had injuries with their receiving core. Their offense, plain and simple, just has not lived up to any kind of hype that they had coming into the season. They've been a disappointment. I think there were some that thought, their passing game looked good at the end of last season. They were throwing for 3, sometimes close to 400 yards. And there was a sense that this Michigan State offense would pick up where it left off with how Lewerke was playing at times last season. But they have, in my opinion, regressed, and some of that is injury. So their offense is not scary. Now, for an Ohio State defense, this has been inconsistent at best. I know any opponent right now with a pulse has to worry Ohio State fans and what they're going to do against this Ohio State defense. But I talked about this last week. I said I really didn't think Ohio State's defense played all that poorly last week. I thought there were steps forward, minor signs that maybe Ohio State's defense can improve and turn things around, and they don't have a lot of time to do it. There's only 3 games left in the regular season, and if they manage to win those 3 games and go on to the Big Ten Championship, then, of course, it's all about getting really good in a hurry, because if they get into the playoff, there's a good chance they may play Alabama as soon as the semifinals. So Ohio State's defense does not have a lot of time left to get it right. That's the bad news. But the good news is if they can build off of what those minor things that they did last week, and maybe Brennan White wins the starting job, which, by the way, Urban Meyer has been mum on this whole week. He has not really said what they're going to do. I think, Brennan White is in a dogfight for starting position. I think, based on last week, I don't think you give it to him. I think you make him earn it more in practice, but I think you also give him an advantage without telling him that, because I think that performance he had against Nebraska should earn him some leeway. But where I'm really interested to see, for me, this game against Michigan State, I know so many people are worried about, even if Ohio State manages to beat Michigan and wins the Big Ten title game and gets into the college football playoff, they're so concerned with the Buckeyes being embarrassed in the playoff. And I don't like this line of thinking, by the way. I don't like fans saying, I don't want my team to get in the college football playoff because I think they might get embarrassed. Who cares? You got a chance to win a national championship. You don't worry about the might getting embarrassed. If it's, if I'm crossing the street and there's $100 waiting for me on the other side, I'm not going to take the chance. I'm not going to worry about the chance that I get hit by a car trying to cross the street to get that $100. If I see something in front of me, I'm going for it. I'm not living life scared. So I don't think Buckeye fans should be, you're free to do what you want, wish what you want, but I don't think you should be worried about the fact that they could get crushed by Alabama as a reason you don't want the Ohio State to make the playoff. If they have a chance to make the playoff, then Ohio State should make the playoff. That should not even be an issue, a discussion among Buckeye fans. So, look, yeah, there's a possibility that Ohio State gets embarrassed in the playoff. That's a possibility. The way they're playing, their defense, some of the games that we've seen them in recent weeks, yeah, if they show up and play that poorly against Alabama, it's going to be a long day. But there's no guarantee they will play like that. They could turn it on. They weren't necessarily always clicking in 2014, going into those last couple games of the season. And I'm not trying to compare this necessarily to 2014, but I'm just bringing that up because it's a reminder. You just don't know. They've got talent. They can turn this around. But I think this is a good test because here's the thing. If you are worried about what Ohio State may do in the playoff or against Michigan, well, the good news is if they beat Michigan State, then maybe that worry should go away just a little bit. And the reason is Michigan State's defense, first and foremost, if you haven't been paying attention, they're really good. They're a top 10 defense the way they're playing lately. They've given up a combined total of 40 points in the last 4 games. Penn State, pretty good offense when they played them. Obviously, last week, they looked terrible against Michigan, and part of that was Trace McSorley not being healthy. But Penn State, pretty good offense. Michigan was a pretty good offense, and Michigan State's defense did really well in that game. They held Purdue to 13 points. We know that Purdue offense has been playing really well. We saw it, firsthand against Ohio State. And then Maryland, yeah, Maryland's not a great team, but not a terrible offense, and they held them to 3 points. So this Michigan State defense comes into this game playing really, really well. And if Ohio State can run the ball against Michigan State this week, one of the best run defenses in America, which Michigan is too, by the way, but if they can do it against Michigan State, if they can control the line of scrimmage, average 4.5, 5, maybe even 6 yards a carry against Michigan State, I'm not saying that they can or will do this, but if they can, then suddenly if Ohio State wins this game and gives a decent defensive showing, then I think the concern has to simmer down just a little bit, not go away completely, but if they do it against Michigan State, they can do it against Michigan. And I'm not saying Michigan State's as good as Michigan, but their defense is in that same kind of ballpark. It kind of gets you ready for what you're going to see against Michigan's defense a little bit in terms of quality and consistency, especially stopping the run. So I think this is a great litmus test for the Buckeyes this weekend. I think if they get it done in East Lansing, then suddenly you got to feel a little bit better about the tune-up against Maryland, which I don't think anybody was worried about that game. But you go in, you get the tune-up done, and then you got the game, okay? So this Michigan State win would be really important for Ohio State, and not just because of the obvious. Ohio State has to win this to stay in the running for the Big Ten East Division, but also because I think it tells us, can Ohio State truly go in, play Michigan, and play the way they need to win the game? If they do well and beat Michigan State on the road in East Lansing, then I think the answer is yes. I think that means we have seen what we need to see out of the Buckeyes going in. So, anyway, Ohio State, noon, kickoff in East Lansing, Michigan on Fox against Michigan State. Big game for the Buckeyes. Really offensively especially, because, I mean, defense, every game they need to improve. I think they will build off of last week. I think you're going to see a much better defense. But what they do with the run game against the Spartan defense will tell us a lot about whether or not they are ready to face a serious defensive challenge with Michigan. Can they run the ball and control the line of scrimmage on that side of the ball? That will be key if the Buckeyes want to win against the Wolverines here in a few weeks down the road on November 24th. So I will talk about some Ohio State basketball here, but first let's get into some recruiting with Mark Gibler and get an update on some of the recent commitments and also what is going on with the 2020 class.
It's time to go inside Ohio State recruiting and take a peek behind the scenes with Buckeye Grove recruiting guru Mark Gibler and his magical orb of wonderment. They said it couldn't be done, but he's outdone himself once more. Back for another recruiting roundup.
That's what I do. I drink and I know things.
All right, time for another recruiting roundup here. Mark, I appreciate you joining again, and I know we've had a few things happen since we talked, so it'll be nice to get a little quick update here. We're going to get right into it. You know, I know the topic du jour, it seems like every time we talk now, we have to have the obligatory Zach Harrison update. People are freaking out about this, and I'm not sure there's really anything specific that has changed with Harrison. But right now the wind is blowing towards Ann Arbor with him. What, if anything, has changed? And I know you've said repeatedly, it's Ohio State can't change the things that is hurting them with Zach Harrison being location and proximity and everything and the size of the campus. So has anything in your mind changed with their stance with Harrison, or is this just a case where that's just the people talking and what's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we've seen any type of major shift from where things were a few weeks ago. I think obviously Zach kind of coming in for the Nebraska game instead of the Michigan game, people are going to read into that. I don't know. I guess I can see the concern there of why he didn't pick the Michigan game, but I can also argue that he would have wanted to go to maybe a little bit more low-key game around Columbus, given how many other prospects are going to be on campus for the Michigan game, and in terms of the coaching staff being able to maybe spend a little more time and energy on him for the Nebraska game where there weren't quite as many prospects on campus. But really, I just think, Ohio State is struggling to improve their standing because of what you just mentioned, which is that the things that they have working against them just are not changeable. You can't relocate the campus, and you can't shrink the campus, and that's an issue. And as Michigan continues to be able to fix some of their issues, which were building stronger relationships with him, which they've done over the past 6 months, but now adding to that, they are winning each and every week. They're looking good each and every week. And it's just one of those things, I think, right now that Ohio State's kind of in a struggle to find the right angle to play here that can actually help them. And Michigan naturally is able to play the right angles by playing better football and establishing themselves as a legitimate playoff contender.
So we had some movement in the 2019 class. Ohio State got a long-awaited commitment from a running back, Marcus Crowley, and I know there are some people kind of huffing and puffing, the star watchers, so to speak, because this kid's only a 3-star. But funny enough, you mentioned that you actually saw this kid, and at the time you didn't really know a lot about him, but you were impressed with him. So tell me about what you saw with Marcus Crowley and how he fits in big picture with Ohio State.
Yeah, like the very first weekend of October, it was like the first or the second. I was in Florida and went to a Trinity Christian game, and this was ironically just like the very week before Samson James decommitted. So they weren't really in the market for Marcus Crowley at that point. And I was there to watch Miles Brooks and Fred Davis, who were two of the best cornerback prospects in 2020. And Marcus just kept ripping off these big chunk plays, and not just ripping big plays off, but a lot of them started with him breaking a couple tackles near the line of scrimmage. And he's just a load to bring down. I mean, he runs with such tremendous balance and pad level, and he gets those pads down and he bounces off of guys, and he's got excellent leg drive. I mean, he's a really strong, powerful kid, violent runner. And I don't know, I couldn't tell you what he weighed this morning or whatever, whether he's 190, 195, 200 right now, but he's still got a lot of room there to kind of bulk up, especially in his upper body. So I think he's going to play at about 220 when it's all said and done. And he's just a really really hard-nosed runner, and I think will fit Ohio State's power spread well. And I'm not blowing smoke here. I did not know anything about this kid really before that night, and our Florida analyst Rob Cassidy was there, and he'll vouch for me on this. I mean, I have witnesses here. I went over to Rob at maybe midway through the second quarter. I'm like, who the hell is that kid? And he's like, oh, he's been committed to Miami for a year. That's probably why you haven't really, he was never really out there. He didn't do any camps in the off season because he was committed. And Rob's like, that's probably why you haven't really heard much about him. I said, oh, he's really good. And Rob's like, yeah, he is. And I don't want to put words in Rob's mouth, but I could see a rankings bump coming there. It certainly sounded like he was impressed with him, and obviously that's going to be his call, not mine. But and I know Miami thought, talking to a couple people down in South Florida, Miami thought he was not only one of their strongest commitments in terms of the relationship there for Ohio State to pull him away, but also Miami thought that was one of their better guys in their class. So I think they were pretty upset about this.
So another 19 kid I want to ask you about, Justin Jacobs, linebacker from Clayton Northmont, just down the road in Southwest Ohio, picking up an offer from Ohio State, had been committed to Iowa. So I believe is committed to Iowa, if I'm not mistaken. Does this change anything for Jacobs' recruitment, and does that open the door for Ohio State to get involved with him?
Yeah, I think he's going to listen. We talked about this a little bit with Eichenberg and with a couple of the other in-state guys they offered recently, and right now he's in a playoff run. They are playing Pickerington Central on Friday night. That's where I plan on being Friday night. So I think you'll, again, I know we've said this with a few kids, I think he's going to kind of let the season play out, whether that ends Friday. I mean, it could end Friday night. Pick Central's pretty good. Or whether this continues, but I think he's going to kind of just put his focus on it and energy on that. And then once his season is over, kind of reevaluate things. But, I mean, I think he's going to listen. I think it's more in the J.D. Duplain category where they've got some legitimate work to do and that he's very satisfied with his commitment to Iowa. I mean, this is not a kid that's been looking around. So I think it's more in the J.D. Duplain category of you're going to have to really work for this one more than it is maybe the Kayvon Butler category, which I think is over in Ohio State's favor as soon as that green light is given. But yeah, I mean, long story short, I do expect him to at least listen to what Ohio State has to say, and much like Duplain, who has not visited yet, let's wait for the visit. If the visit happens, it's serious because he's not gonna risk that spot at Iowa for nothing.
Ohio State got a kind of an unexpected commitment here this past week from Jackson Smith, a wide receiver out of Rockwall, Texas. He's a 2020 kid, 6'1", 185 pounds. What can you tell us about this kid, and what is his skill set like?
Yeah, I thought I saw a little Austin Mack in his tape. I mean, he's a physical kid. He's about the same size that Austin was at the same time in their development. very physical at the line of scrimmage. I saw a couple clips there. Guys tried to jam him. And he kind of gave it right back to him and was able to kind of separate. There's some wildcat stuff on there. Him running between the tackles, putting his shoulder down. So he's got good size. He's one of those guys I think he's maybe not elite in one specific thing, but he's also not average in one specific thing. Everything he does pretty much everything well. He runs good routes, he catches the ball, he's got good size, not elite size. He's got good speed, not elite speed. And really is a guy who I thought made a lot of good adjustments to the ball. I spent a lot of time watching his tape here this past week, and I think they got a solid all-around guy that could probably slot in at a few different those receiver spots for him.
It's interesting, Mark, because this 2020 class now, they've got 7 guys committed, all are 4-star or above. In Paris Johnson's case, he's more of a 5-star guy. Only one of those 7 are Ohio kids. So for all of the struggles, the ups and downs, the roller coaster ride we've seen with this 2019 class for Ohio State, they're still reeling in kids for 2020. And I know Jackson Smith this week made mention of wanting to be a leader in this class, is helping recruit, and that's one of the reasons why he pulled the trigger. So it's just kind of funny because the momentum isn't slowing down too much with that 2020 class. What can you tell us? Are there any other guys on the horizon you think? I mean, I know it's still really early, but what can you tell us about that 2020 class? Any other names to watch that Ohio State's doing really well with in the near future?
Yeah, I mean, it's for whatever reason it is rolling in 2020, and it's just not in 2019. And before I kind of go down the 2020 road, I do think part of that is timing. I think if you're a 2020 kid, all this Urban Meyer stuff that's out there right now, you're probably not too worried about that because of doomsday scenario, Urban Meyer's no longer there at the end of the year. You've got 12 months to figure your own situation out. You got plenty of time. Whereas I think the 19 guys are putting a little more concern into that because obviously they've got to sign soon, and they're much more concerned about that situation. So that is what I think. I think that is a base. I mean, obviously it's maybe a little more complex than that, but that's a basic understanding of why 19 is the way it is right now and why 20 is the way it is right now. As far as other players or whatever, I mean, I don't know that anything's close to happening with the 2020 receiving core, but they've done a great job with G. Scott out of Washington. He visited with Sam Adams Jr. Recently. They really hit a home run there. I think that's a kid that's looking very closely at Ohio State. I did mention on the board the other day Julian Fleming, another big-time receiver out of Pennsylvania. I've tried to preach caution on this one because he comes from a part of Pennsylvania that I know pretty well and that historically has always sent their kids to Penn State. But there is a very special connection there, it seems like, between Fleming and Hartline, and I think that's going to be worth watching. I mean, I think that's definitely an interesting situation there, and it would be quite a pull, but I think they're moving in the right direction there. I mean, even you look on the offensive line, a guy like Turner Corcoran out of Kansas is a highly rated guy who I've been told for several months, Ohio State's going to be right there, and he's supposed to be coming up here for the Michigan game. I mean, that's a guy to keep an eye on. There's a lot of guys, and maybe we'll break the internet here. The guy, talk about a lot of like the big name guys nationally, top 50 type kids that Ohio State's in on right now, and you could name literally probably a dozen of the top 50 as guys that Ohio State's in the top couple schools for right now. I love where they stand right now with Mikhail Sherman out of Washington D.C., who is definitely one of the 10 best players in the country in that class. If you told me you thought he was number one, I may not argue with you. I think they stand really good there. He is supposed to be at the Michigan game. Would he go this early? I don't know, but they are doing all the right things there. He has a great relationship with the defensive coaches. He's a great relationship with Urban Meyer.
Yeah, you hear so much about those St. John's kids, and then you hear a lot about Elias Ricks, and I mean the names just keep. You can list, like you said, probably a dozen of those top 50 kids that Ohio State is attached with, and you hear mentioned all the time. So it just seems like if nothing happens with the Urban Meyer situation, and he is back at Ohio State, like everyone is hoping and expecting right now, provided nothing changes there. It does feel like that 2020 class eventually is just going to wind up being bonkers.
Yeah, and I mean, just building off Marcus Crowley, I did mention this on the site this week, but those 2020 kids at Trinity Christian, Fred Davis and Miles Brooks, were pretty fired up about that commitment. And I talked. Fred is kind of a little more reserved. He doesn't, he's a little more the quieter one of the two. So Fred was kind of said definitely helped Ohio State, things like that. Miles was much more outgoing about it. He was really fired up about this, and there's a lot of people down on the ground there that think they can make it 4 years in a row at Trinity Christian with at least one of those kids. So it's going to be interesting. They looking at the offer lists and everything else. I mean, the potential is there at a few positions, but looking at some of the guys they're on in the secondary is just staggering. Keely Ringo, Elias Ricks. I mean, these are there's 5-star guys, and then there's 5-star guys, and Keely Ringo and Elias Ricks. Those are special talents. I'm not saying all 5-star kids should be rated 5 stars because they're great players, but there's a little extra to guys like that and a Mikhail Sherman. But looking at the secondary specifically with like Ricks and Davis and Ringo, those are legitimate. Like, you look at those guys and you're like, well, those guys are going to play 3 years in college and then they're going to be off to the NFL and be first-round picks. I mean, they just have that look to them, and they're in the game on all of them. So it's going to be interesting to see how they do this with the defensive backs and how many of these guys they could actually get.
Yeah, it could be crazy. Like we said, I mean, it's going to come down to obviously Ohio State maintaining the continuity with Urban Meyer and the staff. But if that happens and there's nothing to any of these rumors and all the chatter and everything, then that 2020 class could be one for the ages if Ohio State can keep it up. So, well, Mark, I appreciate the update, and we will keep an eye on things here as we go down the stretch of the recruiting period. And, of course, we'll have you back here in the next couple of weeks, and especially before that Michigan game to target what we expect will be a big visitation weekend.
I have never started a visitor list preview as early as this upcoming Michigan game. I've literally already started piecing my preview story together because I have to, because there's so many big time players coming.
Well, we can definitely touch on that the Friday before the Michigan game. Yes, we will talk about that
soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, the Friday before the Michigan game, we will definitely be talking some recruiting, and I'm sure there will be a lot to talk about for that. So you can catch Mark, obviously, on BuckeyeGrove.com and catch his work all the time, and you can also follow him on Twitter at MarkGiblerBG. Mark, I appreciate the update. We'll catch you here in the next couple weeks.
Yep, thank you.
Stretch runtime here at Unscripted Ohio. Kick up your feet as we cross the finish line with the Buckeye Beat, the latest in Ohio State news and notes.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
So before I wrap the show up here in the Buckeye Beat, I want to talk for a few minutes about Ohio State basketball. And I tell you what, there was a part of me that felt like making this the lead story and not putting this at the end of the show, because I know it feels weird to say this after only one game in the season, because it is only November 9th. So we have to temper our enthusiasm before we get any further with this conversation. But do you feel like I do? Because it's only one game. Cincinnati, for all we know, may not end up being an NCAA tournament team. I will tell you this. They were, as I said on the preview early in the week, Cincinnati was the number 2 rated defense in all of the country in Pomeroy's adjusted defensive efficiency last year. And although they did lose 3 out of their top 4 scorers from last year's team, defense has traveled for Mick Cronin for the last several years. So there is no doubt in my mind when you look at Pomeroy or BPI or any of those power ratings that measure offensive and defensive efficiency, if you look at performance at the end of the year, I promise you Cincinnati is going to be in the top 10, maybe top 20 defenses in the country. That I am sure of. That Cincinnati defense is very, very good. They're physical, they're aggressive, they're athletic, they're talented. They can really get in your grill, and they have the want to when it comes to playing defense. So Ohio State's offensive struggles, which were kind of coming and going in that 64-56 win, they really got going there at a point in the second half. They, of course, struggled down the stretch a little bit with pressure. But for the most part, Ohio State, it was a roller coaster ride offensively, but they did pretty well, I thought, to handle Cincinnati's pressure. So there is still some concern about Ohio State offensively. I think they're going to go through periods where they're not scoring a lot this year. They're not always going to be a great shooting team. I don't think you expect this team to shoot 40% as a club by any stretch of the imagination. But do take a grain of salt. Take it into account that Cincinnati is going to be a very good defense. That I promise you. But my point here is Cincinnati may or may not be a tournament team. I don't know about their offense. They've got a couple guys that I think are going to be very good when push comes to shove. But when the end of the season is here and it's time to place 68 teams into the NCAA tournament field, I don't know if Cincinnati is going to be in that field or not. I think they're going to be on the bubble like I thought Ohio State would be at the end of the year. I think Cincinnati defensively is going to be good enough. I think offensively, it's hard to say what we get out of the Bearcats. But regardless of where Cincinnati finishes, and this is how I'm taking a long-winded, long approach, a long way around here making this point, no matter where Cincinnati finishes with their final record and in the standings and whether or not they make the NCAA tournament, I think that this is an extremely impressive win for Ohio State, and I think it is a quality win, even if the resume/profile may not suggest it is at the end of the year. For this moment in time, as of November 7th, when Ohio State played the game in Cincinnati, I think that this is absolutely a quality win for the Buckeyes. And the reason I say that is because you had so much working against Ohio State. You were playing a very good defensive team. You were playing against a sold-out, pumped-up crowd for the reopening of their building, which was also, just pumped up from the atmosphere, the fact that they were playing Ohio State, the flagship institution in the state of Ohio. And don't ever let any Bearcat fan tell you that they don't care about Ohio State. I promise you they do. They may play it off like in a normal course of their day, they may not be thinking about Ohio State, but when they get the opportunity to play Ohio State in that situation on their own home floor with a new renovated arena, sold-out crowd, I promise you they absolutely wanted to beat Ohio State. So don't let them tell you that didn't matter, because that game meant a lot. And so for Ohio State to go into that environment, and I credit Cincinnati, by the way, they've been terrible in attendance, up until last year when they were playing off campus at NKU. Cincinnati had been drawing just some pitiful crowds, and I touched on this Monday on the podcast last week. I think part of that is because that whole program has become so stale and so boring because they don't play, you saw it offensively. They're not a fun style to watch necessarily. They play a pitiful non-conference schedule. I think there are a lot of reasons that fan base has not been coming to games. But for that particular game, with everything surrounding the hype of this game and the fact it's a new arena, it was a great environment. I credit their crowd. It was loud. It was sold out. It was impressive. They were into the game. So Ohio State battling a good defensive team, battling a hostile crowd. And let's be perfectly honest here, that officiating was horrible. Ohio State was getting called for touch fouls, in some cases phantom fouls, where Luther Muhammad puts his hand on a jersey and the guy flops, falls to the ground. And not only do they call Luther Muhammad for a foul, but they even go to the monitor and review it, and they could have called a flop and still didn't call it. And, Ohio State was just not getting the same benefit of the calls that Cincinnati was getting, because Cincinnati was playing tough, physical, aggressive defense, using their hands, using their bodies 30 feet away from the basket. But anytime Ohio State, touched a guy, they were getting called. The foul differential wasn't a big difference, but the problem is the way the game was called was completely different. Ohio State was getting called for touch fouls. Cincinnati was only getting called for fouls down underneath the basket, or if it was just an obvious hack. I mean, they were not getting called for the same touch fouls. And then you throw in the bogus technical on Luther Muhammad. You throw in a couple of those out-of-bounds calls that were just horrible, and then the flop I mentioned. It was basically 8-on-5, 9-on-5 if you want to count the crowd. I mean, Ohio State may have been playing 9-on-5 at moments in that second half with the officials, the crowd, and Cincinnati's stifling defense. And by the way, they are a good defense regardless of whether or not they were being called for fouls. I'm not taking anything away from Cincinnati's defense. I actually think, unlike some Purdue teams we've seen in the past and some other teams that we've seen Ohio State play, Cincinnati plays good defense. They're not as handsy as Purdue. They don't check you as much. I'm not saying that they should have been called for a bunch of fouls, but they were playing very physical and getting away with more than Ohio State was. So, but you add in all of that, long way around here, it was a great win for Ohio State. And I didn't think coming into the game that Ohio State would necessarily win this game. I didn't think that they would have enough shooting and making baskets when they really needed them when push came to shove. Not only were they able to withstand the crowd and Cincinnati's pressure and the inconsistent officiating, but man, they stepped up. They made some shots when they needed to. Keyshawn Woods, when they were really struggling in the first half, made a couple big baskets that kind of got their momentum going. Luther Muhammad made several key baskets throughout the course of the game. C.J. Jackson made a couple daggers. Caleb Weston played really well. Kyle Young, man, that guy was all over. I said this last year. I said it back in the spring and summer. Kyle Young is going to be a different player this year. What you saw last year with him, and even to a lesser extent Musa Jallow too, by the way. This also applies to him. Now that they've been in the system and they've played college basketball for a year, you're going to see a different guy out of each of them. You're going to see more confident. You saw Musa. Musa was pretty big, made a couple big defensive plays. Offensively, he's still feeling his way out. You don't want him shooting a lot right now because I don't think he's there yet with his offensive game, but I do think eventually he's going to be there. But Kyle Young is already there, already. That guy probably had a bunch of floor burns after that game because he was all over the place. He was rebounding, playing well offensively. He made a bunch of key free throws in the second half. You just got to like what you see out of this team. And I still worry about the shooting because Luther Muhammad, although he made some big shots, is not going to be a high percentage guy. C.J. Jackson, you'd like to see his percentage come up a little bit. He made shots when it absolutely mattered on Wednesday, but you want to see him up over the 40% mark if he can get there. Dwayne Washington, another guy that can make shots. I'm not sure he's going to be a high percentage shooter this year. Maybe later on down the road in his career, he will be at that mark the Buckeyes want to see him at. But this year, it's going to be touch and go offensively. There's going to be some droughts. But the good news is this team is going to play defense. It's going to hustle. It's never going to be short on effort or determination. I was really impressed with their team rebounding philosophically. When they go small, they had some problems keeping Cincinnati off the offensive boards, and that's just because of sheer size. They gave up like 40% of the available offensive rebounds, which is not very good. You can live with that in certain situations, and Ohio State is going to have to live with that just because they are smaller and they're going to play small at times. But what I do like about that is they gave up some rebounds that just were sheer size, but their guards attack the glass. They seem to have pretty good instincts for finding the ball and getting in position. They block out pretty well. I think this team's rebounding, by the way, they out-rebounded Cincinnati in aggregate rebounds. Now, they did not beat Cincinnati when it comes to rebounding percentage, but in terms of just total rebounding, they actually out-rebounded the Bearcats on Wednesday, which is a decent sign. It's not as important as rebounding percentage, but still, the actual raw number was where Ohio State, I think, given the circumstances, would be okay with it being. So, I mean, when you add all these things in, Ohio State, with the ability to hit shots when they needed to, along with the defense and rebounding and everything else, you got to like where the Buckeyes were at on Wednesday. I thought this was a huge win. Again, if you compare it to, watching Duke against Kentucky or watching Kansas against Michigan State, yeah, Ohio State is not on that level. It is just one game. So I'm not trying to say the Buckeyes are a tournament team clearly because of this one win. That is not what I'm saying at all. But just for this one game, based on where we thought the Buckeyes would be this point in the season, I think you got to be tickled pink. This is a huge win for Ohio State. I think it shows a little bit of the kind of potential that this team has. They were picked 8th in the preseason in the Big Ten poll. I thought that seemed low to me anyway, and who knows, they could still finish 8th or even further down below than 8th. But I really think when push comes to shove, this is a team that could finish in the top 5 in the Big Ten, maybe push for an NCAA tournament bid. But I'm not going to count out Chris Holtmann and his staff. Man, I tell you, these guys, they clearly can coach. They've got a pulse for their team. They've got this whole franchise, this whole club, playing like a bunch of junkyard dogs. Kyle Young, Luther Muhammad, Musa Jallo. When these guys are on the floor, they're diving for loose balls. They're just outworking the opponents on the floor right now. That was true against NC Pembroke, which is unusual, and I said it at the time. It's unusual to see the Division I team in an exhibition out-hustling the Division II team, but they did it, and then they out-hustled Cincinnati on their own floor. Really like where Ohio State is at right now. If C.J. Jackson continues to play the leadership role, Caleb Wesson stays out of foul trouble, Luther Muhammad shows the kind of flash that we saw against Cincinnati, this is going to be a very good team. They just need, I think, either Dwayne Washington or Musa Jallo to step up. And Jaden Leday, who, by the way, we got some questions as to why Leday didn't play against Wednesday. I don't think Ohio State went into that game expecting to not play him. I think it was just a situation where Holtmann saw the way the game was playing out, and I think he realized it was so important to keep Kyle Young and Caleb Wesson on the floor the way that game was playing out. I think his decision was just purely in the moment, I've got to keep these guys on the floor. I don't think it was anything against Jaden Leday. I think he is going to play a lot. I think you'll see him on Sunday against Purdue-Fort Wayne. I think you'll see him in coming games and coming weeks. Plenty of time, I think, to make the rotation, and I think he will be there. I just think that game was a game that Holtmann decided in the moment he wanted to win, and he did not want to mess with the chemistry that he had out on the floor. But when it all comes down, I think as the season plays out, I really do think this Ohio State team is going to continue to improve offensively. I think a few of those things will happen. I think you're going to see Luther Muhammad step up as a leader on the floor. He already is there in terms of intangibles, but I think you'll see it offensively as well. Add in, Dwayne Washington or Jalen Leday, guys like that stepping up and hitting shots down the road, and you've got a pretty good Buckeye basketball team. So that's my thoughts. Huge win, not necessarily because this means that, one game out of 30-some, does that make Ohio State an NCAA tournament team? I'm not saying that at all. But for this moment in time, to start off the season with that win was absolutely huge for this program. The future is only going to get brighter from here. It's just a matter of what happens these next several weeks, next several months. Where does Ohio State basketball go this year? Still too soon to say, but that was a major step in the right direction. So that's going to do it for the podcast today. We will be breaking down Ohio State and Michigan State on Monday. Also talk a little bit about Ohio State's game with Purdue-Fort Wayne on Sunday. But Kirk and Ross and I will break down the Spartans and Buckeyes on Monday in our recap podcast. You can catch Unscripted Ohio every Monday and Friday on BuckeyeGrove.com. You can also find, follow, subscribe, and listen to us, rate us, and review us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. Thanks, everybody, for giving me a listen. Catch me on Twitter at KYLam8. Have a great weekend. Catch me again on Monday. Go Bucks.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.